Okay, now we go and solve some problems regarding the unemployment part of the chapter. Now, question or problem number 7, it says the following. Given the following data, civilian non-institutional population, CNP, is 1 million. The employment rate, the employment is missing, the unemployment missing, the unemployment rate is 10%, the labor force is missing, the labor force participation rate, we can represent this one by labor force participation rate, LFPR, is 40%. So now calculate the missing values. Well, since the labor force participation rate is given, so I can start with the labor force participation rate. Now I know that labor force participation rate, LFPR, is equal labor force over civilian non-institutional population times 100. So labor force participation rate is 40%. So we can say 40% divided by 100, you get 0.4 is equal labor force, let's denote the labor force by LF, over the civilian non-institutional population, which is what? We have 1 million. This implies that the labor force is equal 0.4 times 1 million, which is equal, of course, 400,000. So now the labor force is, of course, is 400,000. Now, once we get the labor force, we can, of course, compute other missing values here. Now, the unemployment rate is 10%. So the unemployment rate, we denote it by UR, is equal unemployed over labor force, LF, times 100. So unemployment rate is 10%, 0.1 is equal labor force, is equal unemployed over the labor force. Labor force, we already calculated that in the first calculation of the labor force participation rate, which is 400,000. This implies that unemployed is equal, which implies unemployed is equal 0.1 times 400,000, which is equal, of course, 40,000. So now the unemployed are 40,000 individuals. Now I need to calculate, of course, the employed. I know that labor force is equal unemployed plus employed, which implies that employed is equal labor force minus unemployed. So employed is equal labor force is 400,000 minus unemployed, which is 40,000, which implies employed is equal 360,000. Okay, now we calculated, of course, all the missing variables. Now let's move to the second equation. Okay, second equation is as follows. Okay, this is problem number 8. Let me state the problem. Given the following data, unemployed equal 100,000, labor force is 1 million, civilian non-institutional population or working age population equal, of course, is equal 1,500,000. Now we need to calculate the following. A number of employed, A number of employed, so employed is equal labor force minus unemployed. Which is equal, labor force is 1 million minus unemployed is 100,000, which is equal 900,000. Now, part B, calculate the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate is equal unemployed over labor force times 100. LF is labor force, which is equal unemployed is 100,000 over labor force is 1 million times 100, and we get, of course, 10%. So the unemployment rate is 10%. Now, part C, calculate the employment rate. Employment rate is equal employed over civilian non-institutional population times 100. So you get here employment rate is equal employed is 900,000 over civilian non-institutional population is 1,500,000 times 100, and here we come up with a 60%. So ER is equal 60%. Okay, as you can see here, that the unemployment rate and don't add up with the employment rate. That is, the sum of the unemployment rate and the employment rate do not equal 100. Why? Because both differ in the denominator. The unemployment rate is divided by the labor force, while the employment rate, the denominator is the civilian non-institutional population. Therefore, if the unemployment rate is 10%, doesn't mean that the employment rate is 90%. However, as we get over here, the employment rate is 60%. So the sum of both don't equal 100%. Now, part D, let me erase over here. Part D says calculate the new unemployment rate if there are about 30,000 vacancies were created and filled by the unemployed people. So first we have 100,000 unemployed. So now the economy is creating 30,000 jobs. So those 30,000 jobs were filled by the unemployed. So now the new unemployed people, the new number of the unemployed people is 100,000 minus 30,000. So a new unemployed, the new number the new number of the unemployed is equal 100,000 minus 30,000, which is equal 70,000. This is the new number of the unemployed. So now we need to calculate the new unemployment rate, given that 30,000 vacancies were filled by the unemployed. So as you can see, the labor force is still the same, because now those, the unemployed, of course, filled, the 30,000 jobs. So the labor force consists of the sum of the unemployed and employed. So therefore, the new unemployment rate is equal 70,000 over 1 million. Times 100, which is equal, of course, 0.7. Which is equal to 7%. So now, as you can see, the new unemployment rate is now 7%. Before, it was 10%. Now, the last part of the question is that calculate the number of people who are not in the labor force. Well, as you can see, the civilian non-institutional population E here, civilian non-institutional population equal the sum of the people in the labor force and the people who are not in the labor force. So civilian non-institutional population equal labor force plus not labor force. Labor force plus not labor force. Yeah, civilian non-institutional population is equal people in the labor force plus people who are not in the labor force. So we know that civilian non-institutional population equal 1,500,000 is equal labor force is 1 million minus not in the labor force. Therefore, not labor force is equal 1,500,000 minus 1 million, which is equal 500,000. So, not labor force equal 500,000. The sum of not labor force and labor force equal the civilian non-institutional population.